Now, let's talk about the feedback that we as professors provide students when they are committing mistakes. There is this tendency that we want to correct every single mistake when we observe it, especially if we are very familiar with the second language. So, what to do and when to do it? Okay, let's start with this. Let's think about a class. Imagine that your students are understanding perfectly the concept that you are teaching, but you have been observing that they are committing the same mistake, say, in the pronunciation of a word. You have been observing that this may cause a problem in the understanding of the concept, and not only that, that students will have a trouble there because that word may be confused or maybe interpreted as another thing. In that case, the appropriate feedback to be given to students to avoid problems is telling them in general, like, okay, I've been observing that this word has been hard for you to pronounce, so the pronunciation is this. But don't stick to that word every single time that you observe that they are committing the same mistake. This may cause some frustration on students. The second advice when giving feedback is don't correct directly when students are expressing their answer. Normally, when we observe the mistake, we want to correct it right away. Don't do it. That may cause a frustration in the students and they won't want to participate in your class anymore. So, what you can do is write on a piece of paper or maybe on the board some of the words that you're observing that has been repeated many times, not only by one student, and this is important to remember. The mistake should be corrected only when it is causing a trouble and most of the students are committing the same mistake. So, once you have this note on the board or on a piece of paper, you need to make the correction. Only, and I repeat and I emphasize, when it is strictly necessary. If you're observing that students are able to communicate, that they are able to express their ideas, that they are following the models that you have presented to them in order to compare, to contrast, to give opinions, to whatever you are doing, don't stop them by correcting the mistake. Another important point here in feedback is the kind of feedback that you want to give to your students. Making a mistake, you gotta pay a lot of attention if your correction is the correct one. Why? Sometimes we have learned to say a word in a way, let's say with the American accent. But what happens if a student is pronouncing this word with a British accent? So you need to be careful with the kind of corrections that you are doing to your students. Now, let's focus our attention to the corrections in written papers. We're not only teaching students for them to listen and maybe produce orally. Sometimes we expect them to give us a paper, a research paper, a homework. What is the kind of correction that we have to do here? Well, in this case, first we need to focus our attention in the kind of content that we are receiving from students. If we are able to understand the message, if we are able to understand or perceive that they are really getting the information from the activity we were requesting them to do, let's pay less attention to those mistakes. What I mean is don't correct every single mistake. For example, there is a spelling mistake, I correct it. There is a punctuation mistake, I correct it. And then this word have a problem of having double letters instead of one or vice versa. So it is not necessary to correct every single mistake. When teaching language courses, yes, you need to focus your attention on that because it is the basics. But when we're talking about content courses, it is not necessary to do that unless, as I've been telling you, when it is really important for the understanding of the concept, for the understanding of the concept that has been taught. So don't correct every single mistake. Also, don't get angry if some of your students are correcting you. Sometimes it happens. Remember, this is not your first language. It is not the language of everybody. So sometimes accepting that we are also committing mistake, it's okay. Don't let your students to overpass that limit between being disrespectful and really helping you to improve. But also have this attitude that you can also learn from them. This is not our first language. This is not the language we use every day in our daily lives. So don't be angry and don't be upset if a correction is also done to you. So, what is the suggestion here? Be open to those corrections and always check on the pronunciation or always check on the correct grammar that you are using in your classes. Don't forget that planning is the key to avoid problems.